Right now, most of your decisions are not logical. They are emotional. You say things in anger. You quit in frustration. You delay in fear. You choose comfort over growth. And in the moment, it feels justified. But later, you see the cost. Missed opportunities. Broken consistency. Regret. Because emotions are temporary. But decisions are permanent. And if you allow temporary emotions to control permanent decisions, you slowly lose control over your future. This audiobook is about taking that control back. In this audiobook, you will learn how to separate emotion from decision-making, how to stay stable under pressure, how to avoid impulsive choices, and how to build a mindset that prioritizes logic over feeling. You will learn how to pause before reacting, how to think clearly when emotions rise, how to build discipline that overrides impulse, and how to make decisions that serve your long-term future, not your short-term comfort. Because your future is not decided in big moments. It is decided in small emotional decisions, repeated daily. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Stop making decisions in emotional states. Most of your worst decisions are not made when you lack intelligence. They are made when you lack control. In emotional states, your thinking changes. It becomes narrow, reactive, and distorted. You do not see the full picture. You do not evaluate consequences clearly. You focus on what you feel in the moment, not what is actually true. And when decisions are made from that state, they carry long-term consequences. Calm mind, clear decisions. This is the principle you must understand at a deep level. Your emotional state directly affects the quality of your decisions. When you are angry, you exaggerate problems. When you are anxious, you assume the worst. When you are excited, you ignore risks. When you are frustrated, you rush to escape discomfort. In all of these states, your judgment is compromised. But the danger is that in the moment, it feels justified. You believe your reaction is correct. You believe your decision makes sense. Because emotion convinces you. It creates certainty without clarity. And that is where mistakes happen. Calm mind, clear decisions. Most people do not recognize this pattern. They make decisions while emotional and only realize the mistake afterward. They regret what they said, what they chose, or how they acted. But by then, the decision is already made. So the solution is not to fix decisions after they happen. It is to prevent them from being made in emotional states. This requires awareness and control. The first step is recognition. You must be able to identify when you are in an emotional state. This sounds simple, but it is not. Because when emotions are strong, they take over your thinking. You do not step back and analyze. You react. So you must train yourself to notice the signals. Increased heart rate. Faster thoughts. Strong urges to act immediately. Difficulty thinking clearly. These are indicators that your state is unstable. And when your state is unstable, your decisions will be unreliable. Calm mind, clear decisions. The next step is delay. When you recognize that your emotions are elevated, you do not decide. You wait. This is one of the most powerful habits you can build. Because time reduces emotional intensity. What feels urgent in the moment often becomes manageable after a short delay. What feels certain becomes questionable. What feels overwhelming becomes clearer. But this only happens if you give it time. If you act immediately, you lock in the emotion. If you delay, you allow clarity to return. Calm mind, clear decisions. This delay does not need to be long. Sometimes a few minutes is enough. Sometimes you need hours. In more significant situations, you may need a day. The duration is not fixed. What matters is that your emotional intensity decreases before you decide. You are not avoiding the decision. You are improving the quality of it. Another important point is that delaying a decision is not weakness. Most people associate speed with confidence. They believe that deciding quickly means they are strong or capable. But in emotional situations, speed is often a mistake. Because you are not deciding with clarity. You are reacting with emotion. True control is not about speed. It is about accuracy. And accuracy requires calmness. Calm mind, clear decisions. To apply this consistently, you need a rule. When emotions are high, decisions are delayed. No exceptions. If you are angry, you do not respond immediately. If you are upset, you do not make commitments. If you are excited, you do not take risks without evaluation. You pause. You step back. You allow your state to stabilize. This rule protects you from impulsive decisions, because it creates a barrier between emotion and action. Another key aspect is understanding the cost of emotional decisions. Every decision has consequences. Some are small, others are significant. But when decisions are made emotionally, the risk of negative consequences increases. You say things you cannot take back. You choose options that do not align with your goals. You create problems that could have been avoided. And these consequences often last longer than the emotion that caused them. That is the imbalance. A temporary feeling leads to a long-term outcome. Calm mind, clear decisions. This is why control is critical. You must protect your future from your temporary states. You must ensure that your decisions are made with clarity, not intensity. This requires discipline, because your instinct will be to act. When emotions rise, the urge to respond immediately is strong. You want to resolve the feeling. You want to release the tension. But acting does not always resolve the situation. It often makes it worse. So instead of acting, you wait. You let the emotion pass. You return to a neutral state. And then you decide. Calm mind, clear decisions. Over time, this becomes a habit. You stop reacting immediately. You start observing your state. You create space between feeling and decision. And that space changes everything. Because in that space, your thinking improves. You consider consequences. You evaluate options. You choose more effectively. This leads to better outcomes. Not because you are smarter, but because you are more controlled. Another benefit is reduced regret. When you make decisions calmly, you are less likely to look back and question them. You act with clarity, not impulse. And that creates confidence. Because you trust your decisions. You know they were made from a stable state, not from temporary emotion. Calm mind, clear decisions. This also affects how others perceive you. When you do not react emotionally, you appear composed. You communicate more clearly. You make more rational choices. This builds credibility. People trust your judgment because it is consistent, not influenced by emotional fluctuations. And that trust creates opportunities because reliability is valued. To strengthen this habit, practice in small situations. When you feel irritated, do not respond immediately. When you feel pressured, delay your decision. When you feel excited, take time to evaluate. These small repetitions build your control. And over time, they become automatic. You no longer need to remind yourself. You naturally pause. You naturally delay. You naturally think before deciding. Calm mind, clear decisions. This is how you take control of your future. Not by eliminating emotion, but by managing when it influences your decisions. You feel everything, but you do not decide in that state. You wait. You stabilize. You think. And then you act. Because your future is not shaped by how you feel in the moment. It is shaped by the decisions you make. And those decisions must be made with clarity, not emotion. So adopt this rule. Apply it consistently. Chapter 2. Separate feelings from facts. Your emotions feel real. That is the problem. When you feel something strongly, your mind treats it as truth. If you feel disrespected, you assume someone disrespected you. If you feel like you are failing, you assume you are failing. If you feel uncertain, you assume something is wrong. But feelings are not facts. They are interpretations. Feel it, then analyze it. This is the principle you must learn to apply. Because if you do not separate your feelings from reality, your decisions will always be distorted. Emotions are generated quickly. They are based on perception, past experiences, and assumptions. They are influenced by your mood, your energy level, and your environment. This makes them unreliable as a source of truth. Yet most people treat them as evidence. They believe what they feel. And that belief shapes their behavior. Feel it, then analyze it. To understand this clearly, you must break the automatic connection between feeling and conclusion. When you feel something, your mind immediately creates a story. I feel ignored, so they don't care. I feel anxious, so something is wrong. I feel uncomfortable, so I should stop. These are not facts. They are interpretations. And interpretations can be wrong. But if you do not question them, you act as if they are correct. This leads to poor decisions, because you are reacting to a perception, not reality. Feel it, then analyze it. The first step is awareness. You must notice when you are turning a feeling into a conclusion. This requires slowing down your thinking. Instead of accepting the first interpretation, you pause. You ask, what am I actually feeling? Not what it means, just the feeling. This creates separation, because now you are identifying the emotion without attaching a story to it. I feel anxious. I feel frustrated. I feel uncertain. This is observation, not judgment. And observation creates clarity. Feel it, then analyze it. Once you identify the feeling, the next step is analysis. You question it, not to dismiss it, but to understand it. You ask, what are the facts? This is where most people struggle, because facts are neutral. They are not influenced by emotion. They are simply what has happened. For example, you feel like someone ignored you. The feeling is real, but the fact might be, they did not respond to your message. That is all. Everything else is interpretation. They might be busy. They might not have seen it. They might respond later. Your feeling created a conclusion that is not necessarily true. Feel it, then analyze it. This is how you separate emotion from reality. You identify what you feel. Then you identify what is actually true. And you do not mix the two. Because when you mix them, your thinking becomes distorted. You react to assumptions. You make decisions based on incomplete information, and that leads to errors. Another important point is that emotions are influenced by your internal state. If you are tired, you are more likely to feel negative. If you are stressed, you are more likely to interpret situations as threats. If you are overwhelmed, you are more likely to assume the worst. This means your feelings are not always about the situation. They are often about your state. So before you trust your emotion, you must consider your condition. Are you tired? Are you stressed? Are you distracted? Because these factors affect how you feel. And if your state is unstable, your interpretation will be unreliable. Feel it, then analyze it. This does not mean you ignore your emotions. It means you do not let them decide your actions without evaluation. You respect them as signals, but you verify them before acting. Because signals are not instructions. They are indicators. Another key aspect is challenging assumptions. When you feel something strongly, your mind wants to confirm it. It looks for evidence that supports the feeling. This is called confirmation bias. If you feel someone is against you, you notice only the actions that support that belief. You ignore everything else. This strengthens the emotion, but it distorts reality. So you must actively challenge your assumptions. Ask, what evidence supports this? Then ask, what evidence contradicts this? This creates balance. It forces your mind to consider multiple perspectives, and that improves your judgment. Feel it, then analyze it. Over time, this process becomes automatic. You stop reacting immediately to emotions. You start questioning them. You create a gap between feeling and conclusion, and that gap gives you control. Because now your decisions are based on reality, not perception. Another benefit is emotional stability. When you separate feelings from facts, your emotional reactions become less intense, because you are not amplifying them with assumptions. You are observing them, analyzing them, understanding them. This reduces their impact, and that creates calmness. Feel it, then analyze it. This also improves your communication. When you act on emotions without analysis, your responses are often exaggerated or inaccurate. You might accuse, assume, or react strongly. But when you separate feelings from facts, your communication becomes clearer. You respond based on what is true, not what you feel. This leads to better outcomes, because clarity reduces conflict. Another important point is that this process requires practice. It will not happen automatically at first. Your mind is used to reacting quickly. It is used to turning feelings into conclusions. So you must train yourself. In small situations, when you feel something, pause. Identify the feeling. Then ask, what are the facts? Repeat this process again and again until it becomes natural. Feel it, then analyze it. As you continue, you will notice a shift. You become less reactive, more thoughtful, more controlled. Your decisions improve because they are based on reality, not emotion. And this changes your outcomes because clear thinking leads to better choices, and better choices shape your future. So remember this: your feelings are real, but they are not always true. They must be examined. They must be understood. They must be separated from facts. Only then can you act effectively. So apply the principle consistently. Feel it, then analyze it. That is how you take control of your thinking and your decisions. Chapter 3. Master the pause before action. Most mistakes are not caused by lack of knowledge. They are caused by speed. The speed at which you react, speak, and decide often determines the quality of your outcome. In emotional moments, your instinct is to act immediately. You want to respond, to fix, to release tension. That urgency feels necessary, but it is usually destructive. Because when you act instantly, you are not thinking clearly. You are reacting. And reaction is driven by emotion, not logic. Pause before you proceed. This is the principle that creates control. The pause is not hesitation. It is a deliberate interruption of your automatic response. It is the moment where you stop emotion from becoming action. Without the pause, your behavior is predictable. You react the same way every time. You follow patterns that are driven by impulse. You say things you regret. You make decisions you later question. You act without considering consequences. And once the action is taken, it cannot be undone. That is why the pause is critical. It protects you from your first reaction. Pause before you proceed. Your brain is designed for speed. When something triggers you, it moves quickly. It prioritizes immediate response over thoughtful evaluation. This is useful in situations that require instant action, but in most modern situations, it creates problems. Because most decisions benefit from thinking. But thinking requires time. And time only exists if you create it. That is what the pause does. It creates space. Space between stimulus and response. Space where awareness can operate. Space where logic can replace emotion. Pause before you proceed. To apply this, you must recognize the moment before action. The moment where you feel the urge to react. This moment is brief. It can last a second or less. But it is there. You feel the impulse to speak, to respond, to decide. That is your signal. Instead of acting, you pause. Even for a few seconds. That small delay changes everything. Because in those seconds, your emotional intensity begins to decrease. Your breathing stabilizes. Your thoughts slow down. And as that happens, your clarity improves. You move from reaction to awareness. Pause before you proceed. The pause is not about doing nothing. It is about controlling what you do next. During the pause, you observe. What am I feeling? Why do I want to react? What is the best response? These questions shift your thinking. They move you from impulse to evaluation. And evaluation leads to better decisions. Another important aspect is that the pause prevents escalation. In many situations, especially conflicts, reactions build on each other. One emotional response triggers another. This creates a cycle. Reaction leads to reaction. And the situation intensifies. But when you pause, you break that cycle. You do not add to the emotional energy. You reduce it. This changes the direction of the interaction. Because you are no longer reacting. You are controlling. Pause before you proceed. Most people avoid the pause because it feels uncomfortable. Silence feels awkward. Delay feels unnatural. Your mind tells you to act immediately. But that discomfort is temporary. And it is far less damaging than a poor decision. You must train yourself to tolerate that discomfort. To stay in the pause. Because that is where control exists. Another key point is that the pause gives you perspective. When you react instantly, you see the situation from a narrow viewpoint. You focus on what triggered you. You ignore other factors. But when you pause, your perspective expands. You consider context. You consider consequences. You consider alternatives. This leads to better judgment. Because you are not limited to your initial interpretation. Pause before you proceed. There is also a physical component to the pause. When you feel the urge to react, your body is activated. Your heart rate increases. Your breathing becomes faster. Your muscles tense. This physical state reinforces your emotional response. So during the pause, you must regulate your body. Take a slow breath. Relax your posture. Reduce physical tension. This calms your system. And when your body is calm, your mind follows. This strengthens your control. Another benefit of the pause is improved communication. When you speak without pausing, your words are often reactive. They are influenced by emotion. They may be exaggerated or unclear. But when you pause, you choose your words. You speak with intention. You communicate more effectively. This reduces misunderstandings. And it improves outcomes. Pause before you proceed. To build this habit, you must practice in everyday situations. When someone interrupts you, pause before responding. When you receive unexpected news, pause before reacting. When you feel irritation, pause before expressing it. These small moments are your training ground. Because if you cannot pause in simple situations, you will not pause in complex ones. Repetition builds the habit. And the habit becomes automatic. Another important point is that the pause is not about being slow. It is about being controlled. You can still act quickly when needed, but your actions are deliberate, not impulsive. This distinction matters, because controlled speed is effective. Reactive speed is not. Pause before you proceed. Over time, the pause becomes natural. You no longer react immediately. You create space automatically. You think before acting. And this changes your behavior. You become more composed, more thoughtful, more effective. Because your actions are no longer driven by impulse. They are guided by awareness. Another key benefit is reduced regret. When you act with a pause, you are less likely to make decisions you later question. Because you have considered your options. You have evaluated the situation. You have chosen deliberately. This creates confidence. Because you trust your actions. Pause before you proceed. As you continue to apply this principle, your control increases. You stop being reactive. You start being intentional. You take ownership of your responses. And that ownership shapes your outcomes. Because your future is built on your actions. And your actions are determined by how you respond. The pause gives you control over that response. So use it. Every time you feel the urge to act immediately, pause, observe, think, then proceed. Because in that small moment of delay, you gain something powerful. Control. So remember the principle and apply it consistently. Pause before you proceed. Chapter 4. Train yourself to think long-term. Most emotional decisions are short-sighted. They are driven by what feels good now, what relieves discomfort immediately, or what satisfies an urge in the moment. Your mind prioritizes instant relief over future consequences. This is the core problem. Because what feels right now is not always right later. Think beyond the moment. This is the principle you must develop. The ability to shift your focus from immediate emotion to long-term outcome. Because every decision you make has a timeline. There is the immediate effect, how it makes you feel now. And there is the long-term effect, what it creates over time. Most people only consider the first. And that is why they struggle. They choose comfort now and deal with consequences later. They avoid discomfort now and create bigger problems later. They react emotionally now and regret it later. Think beyond the moment. Your brain is naturally wired for short-term thinking. It seeks reward and avoids discomfort. This is useful for survival, but it can be destructive when applied to decision-making. Because long-term success requires the opposite. It requires delayed gratification. It requires enduring discomfort. It requires thinking ahead. This is not automatic. Must be trained. Think beyond the moment. To do this, you must interrupt your emotional impulse. When you feel the urge to act, you ask, what will this decision lead to? Not just now, but later. If you act on impulse, what happens next? What happens in a week? What happens in a month? This question shifts your perspective. It moves you from immediate emotion to future consequence. And that changes your decision. For example, you feel the urge to avoid a difficult task. In the moment, avoiding it feels good. It removes discomfort. But if you think long-term, you see the cost. The task remains incomplete. The pressure increases. the problem grows. So the short-term comfort creates long-term discomfort. This is the pattern. Think beyond the moment. Another example is reacting emotionally in a conversation. In the moment, expressing anger may feel justified. It releases tension. But long-term, it damages relationships. It creates conflict. It leads to regret. Again, short-term relief, long-term cost. When you train yourself to see this pattern, your behavior changes. You stop chasing immediate relief. You start considering consequences. And that improves your decisions. Think beyond the moment. This requires discipline. Because your emotions will still push you toward immediate action. The urge will still be there. But instead of following it, you pause and evaluate. You ask, is this aligned with my long-term goal? If the answer is no, you do not act on it. This is control. You are not ignoring your emotions. You are managing them. Another important aspect is clarity of goals. You cannot think long-term if you do not know what you are aiming for. If your goals are unclear, your decisions will default to short-term comfort. So you must define your direction. What do you want to achieve? What matters over time? These answers create a reference point. When you make decisions, you compare them to your goals. Does this action move me closer or further away? This simplifies your thinking. Because now your decisions are guided by purpose, not emotion. Think beyond the moment. There is also a psychological shift that happens when you adopt long-term thinking. You become less reactive. You become more patient. You become more deliberate. Because you understand that not every moment needs to feel good. You accept temporary discomfort. Because you know it leads to better outcomes. This reduces impulsive behavior and increases consistency. Another key point is that long-term thinking reduces regret. Most regret comes from short-term decisions. Saying something in anger. Avoiding responsibility. Choosing comfort over effort. These actions feel justified in the moment. But later you see the cost. When you think long-term, you avoid these situations. Because you evaluate before acting. And that leads to better outcomes. Think beyond the moment. To build this habit, you must practice regularly. In small decisions. When you feel an urge, pause and ask, what is the long-term impact? Even if the decision is minor. This trains your mind. It creates a pattern. Over time, this pattern becomes automatic. You start thinking ahead naturally. Another useful technique is visualization. Imagine the future outcome of your decision. If you act on impulse, what does it look like? If you act with discipline, what does it look like? Compare the two. This makes the consequences more real. And that influences your choice. Because your mind responds to clear outcomes. Think beyond the moment. There will be situations where the long-term benefit is not immediately visible. This is where trust becomes important. You must trust that consistent, disciplined actions will produce results over time, even if you do not see them immediately. Because long-term success is built on delayed results, not instant feedback. This requires patience, and patience strengthens discipline. Another important factor is consistency. Long-term thinking is not a one-time decision. It is a habit. You must apply it repeatedly, in different situations, in different contexts, until it becomes part of your thinking. Think beyond the moment. As you continue, your decision-making improves. You become less influenced by temporary emotions. You focus on outcomes that matter. You align your actions with your goals. And this creates progress. Because your decisions are consistent. And consistency produces results. Over time, this becomes your identity. You are someone who thinks ahead. Someone who values long-term outcomes. Someone who does not sacrifice the future for the present. This identity strengthens your control. Because your behavior aligns with your thinking. Think beyond the moment. This is how you take control of your future. Not by eliminating emotion, but by refusing to let it dictate your decisions. You feel the urge. You recognize it. But you evaluate before acting. You consider consequences. You choose deliberately. Because your future is shaped by your decisions. And your decisions must be aligned with your long-term goals, not your temporary emotions. So apply this principle consistently. In every situation. In every decision. Train your mind to look ahead, to evaluate outcomes, to prioritize long-term results. Because what you choose today determines what you experience tomorrow. And that choice must be made with clarity, not impulse. So remember, think beyond the moment. Chapter 5. Control impulses through discipline. Impulse is fast. It does not ask for permission. It does not wait for analysis. It appears suddenly, pushes you toward action, and demands immediate satisfaction. And if you do not control it, it controls you. Most people do not realize how much of their behavior is driven by impulse. They think they are making decisions, but in reality they are reacting. They act because they feel like it. They speak because they feel like it. They choose based on what feels easiest in the moment. And this creates inconsistency. I don't act on impulse. This is the standard you must build. Because impulse is the opposite of discipline. Impulse seeks comfort. Discipline seeks progress. Impulse avoids discomfort. Discipline accepts it. Impulse focuses on now. Discipline focuses on outcome. You cannot follow both at the same time. You must choose. I don't act on impulse. To control impulse, you must first understand it. Impulse is not random. It is triggered by internal and external factors. A feeling, a thought, an environment, a habit. Something creates the urge. And that urge pushes you toward immediate action. But the urge itself is not the problem. The problem is acting on it without control. Because impulses are temporary. They rise quickly. They peak. And then they fade. But if you act during that peak, you create consequences that last longer than the impulse. I don't act on impulse. The first step is awareness. You must recognize when an impulse is happening. This requires attention. You notice the urge, the sudden desire to act, the feeling that you need to do something immediately. That is your signal. Instead of acting, you pause. You create a gap. This gap is critical. Because without it, impulse becomes action. With it, impulse becomes something you can observe. And observation creates control. I don't act on impulse. Once you pause, the next step is to let the impulse pass. Do not fight it. Do not suppress it. Just wait. Because impulses are not permanent. They lose strength over time. What feels intense now will feel weaker in a few minutes. But only if you do not act. If you act, you reinforce the pattern. If you wait, you weaken it. This is how you build discipline. Through repetition. Every time you resist an impulse, you strengthen your control. Every time you act on it, you weaken it. I don't act on impulse. Another important aspect is understanding the cost of impulsive behavior. Impulses often feel harmless. Skipping a task, reacting emotionally, choosing comfort. These actions seem small, but they accumulate. And over time they create significant consequences. Inconsistency, poor decisions, lack of progress. Because each impulsive action breaks your pattern. And broken patterns prevent growth. So you must see impulse for what it is. A short-term urge with long-term cost. I don't act on impulse. Discipline replaces impulse with structure. Instead of acting based on how you feel, you act based on what you decided. Your actions are planned. Your behavior is consistent. Your decisions are deliberate. This removes randomness and creates stability. Because your actions are not changing based on momentary urges. They are guided by a standard. I don't act on impulse. To strengthen this, you must create rules. Clear guidelines for your behavior. For example, if I feel like avoiding a task, I start it anyway. If I feel like reacting emotionally, I pause. If I feel distracted, I return to focus. These rules remove ambiguity. They tell you exactly what to do. And that reduces the chance of impulsive action. Because you are not deciding in the moment. You are following a system. I don't act on impulse. Another key factor is managing your environment. Impulses are often triggered by what is around you. If distractions are easily accessible, you will act on them. If temptations are present, you will respond to them. So you must reduce exposure. Remove unnecessary triggers. Limit access to distractions. Create an environment that supports discipline. Because controlling your environment reduces the number of impulses you need to manage. This makes control easier. I don't act on impulse. There is also a mental shift required. You must stop trusting every urge. Just because you feel like doing something does not mean you should do it. Feelings are not instructions. They are signals. And signals must be evaluated. This is where discipline comes in. You decide what actions are acceptable, and you follow that standard, regardless of how you feel. I don't act on impulse. Over time, this changes your behavior. You become less reactive, more controlled, more consistent. Your actions align with your goals, not your impulses, and this creates progress, because consistent action produces results. Another benefit is increased self-respect. When you control your impulses, you trust yourself more. You know that you will not act randomly. You know that you will follow through, and that builds confidence, because your behavior is reliable. I don't act on impulse. There will still be impulses. They do not disappear, but their influence decreases. They become weaker, less persuasive, because you are not reinforcing them. You are observing them, letting them pass, choosing your actions. This is control. Another important point is that discipline is not about being rigid. It is about being intentional. You can still choose comfort. You can still relax. But these choices are deliberate, not impulsive, because there is a difference between choosing and reacting. I don't act on impulse. To apply this, start small. Notice your impulses throughout the day. When you feel the urge to act, pause. Wait. Let it pass. Then decide. Repeat this process again and again until it becomes natural, because repetition builds control, and control builds discipline. As you continue, your behavior stabilizes. You act with intention. You avoid unnecessary mistakes. You stay aligned with your goals. And this creates long-term success, because success is not built on occasional effort. It is built on consistent, disciplined action. And disciplined action requires control over impulse. So remember the principle. Apply it in every situation. Train yourself to pause, to observe, to choose, because your future is shaped by your actions. And your actions must not be controlled by impulse. They must be controlled by discipline. I don't act on impulse. Chapter 6. Reduce emotional triggers in your environment. Most emotional reactions don't come from nowhere. They are triggered. Something in your environment, what you see, hear, experience, or interact with, activates a response inside you. That response may feel automatic, but it is often predictable. And what is predictable can be managed. Control the trigger, control the response. This is the principle you must understand. Instead of constantly trying to control your reactions after they happen, you reduce the number of triggers before they occur. Because prevention is more effective than correction. Most people try to control their emotions in the moment. They rely on willpower to stay calm, to think clearly, to avoid reacting. But if your environment is full of triggers, you are constantly under pressure. You are always reacting. And that makes control difficult. So the smarter approach is to reduce the triggers. Control the trigger, control the response. Start by identifying what triggers your emotional responses. These can be obvious or subtle. Certain people, specific situations, digital content, noise, disorganization. Each of these can influence your state. For example, constant notifications can create stress and distraction. Negative content can affect your mood. Clutter can reduce your focus. Certain interactions can trigger frustration or anxiety. These are not small factors. They shape your mental state. And your mental state shapes your decisions. Control the trigger, control the response. Once you identify your triggers, the next step is to reduce or eliminate them. This requires deliberate action. If your phone distracts you, limit its use. If certain environments create stress, avoid or adjust them. If specific content affects your mindset, stop consuming it. You are not avoiding reality. You are optimizing your environment. Because your goal is not to experience every possible trigger. Your goal is to maintain clarity and control. Another important point is that your environment should support your thinking. It should make it easier to stay calm, easier to focus, easier to act with discipline. This means creating structure, a clean workspace, a quiet area for focus, clear boundaries for your time. These elements reduce unnecessary stimulation. And when stimulation decreases, your mind becomes more stable. Control the trigger, control the response. Digital environments are especially important. Most people are constantly exposed to information. Social media, news, messages, notifications. These create continuous input. And much of this input is designed to trigger emotional responses. Urgency, comparison, frustration, excitement. These reactions pull your attention away from what matters. They create noise. And noise reduces clarity. So you must control your digital environment. Limit notifications. Choose what you consume. Create boundaries for when and how you engage. Because if you do not control it, it will control you. Control the trigger, control the response. Another key factor is routine. When your day is unstructured, you are more exposed to triggers. You move from one situation to another without control. Your environment changes constantly. This increases unpredictability. And unpredictability increases emotional reactions. But when you have a routine, your environment becomes stable. You know where you will be. You know what you will do. You reduce exposure to unnecessary variables. And this supports your discipline. Because stability reduces emotional fluctuation. Control the trigger, control the response. You must also consider social environments. The people around you influence your thinking and behavior. If you are surrounded by negativity, you will experience more negative emotions. If you are around distraction, your focus will decrease. If you are around inconsistency, your discipline will weaken. This does not mean you avoid people. It means you are intentional about your interactions. You choose environments that support your goals. Because your surroundings shape your behavior. Control the trigger, control the response. Another important aspect is preparation. Many emotional reactions happen because you are unprepared. You enter situations without a plan. You face challenges without a strategy. This increases stress. But when you prepare, you reduce uncertainty. And reduced uncertainty leads to calmer responses. For example, if you know a situation might be challenging, you plan your approach. You decide how you will respond. You set expectations. This reduces the chance of being triggered. Because you are ready. Preparation is a form of environmental control. Control the trigger, control the response. There will still be triggers you cannot avoid. Unexpected situations. Unpredictable interactions. These are part of life. But when your environment is generally controlled, your baseline is stable. This makes it easier to handle exceptions. Because you are not constantly overwhelmed. You have the capacity to respond. Another key benefit of reducing triggers is improved focus. When your environment is clean and structured, your attention is not constantly pulled in different directions. You can concentrate. You can think clearly. You can act deliberately. And this improves your decisions. Because clarity leads to better choices. Control the trigger, control the response. Over time, this approach changes your behavior. You become less reactive, more stable, more controlled, because you are not constantly exposed to stimuli that disrupt your thinking. You have created a space that supports discipline, and that space makes your actions more consistent. Another important point is that small changes matter. You do not need to completely redesign your life. Start with simple adjustments. Reduce one distraction. Organize one space. Limit one source of negative input. These small changes accumulate. And over time they create a significant difference. Because your environment becomes aligned with your goals. Control the trigger, control the response. This alignment is powerful. Because now your surroundings support your behavior. They make it easier to act with discipline. They reduce the need for constant effort. They create a system. And systems are more reliable than willpower. To apply this, take control of your environment. Do not accept it as fixed. Adjust it, refine it, improve it. Identify what triggers unnecessary reactions. Remove or reduce it. Identify what supports calm thinking. Strengthen it. Because your environment is not neutral. It is influencing you. Every moment. So make it work for you. Not against you. Control the trigger, control the response. This is how you reduce emotional reactions before they start. This is how you create stability. Chapter 7. Detach from immediate gratification. Most emotional decisions are driven by one thing: the need to feel better now. You feel discomfort and you want to remove it immediately. You feel an urge and you want to satisfy it instantly. You feel pressure and you want relief. This is immediate gratification. It is the desire to exchange long-term benefit for short-term comfort. Short-term comfort, long-term cost. This is the reality most people ignore. Because in the moment, immediate gratification feels harmless, feels small, feels justified. But repeated over time, it becomes destructive. Because every time you choose comfort now, you weaken your future. You delay progress. You break consistency. You reinforce impulsive behavior. And that creates a pattern. Short-term comfort, long-term cost. Your brain is designed to seek reward. It prioritizes what feels good in the moment. This is natural. But if you do not control it, it will lead you away from your goals. Because most meaningful outcomes require delay. They require effort without immediate reward. They require discipline. This is where most people struggle. They act when it feels good. They stop when it feels difficult. And this creates inconsistency. I don't act on impulse. Becomes essential, but here you go deeper. You detach from the need to feel rewarded immediately. Short-term comfort, long-term cost. To understand this clearly, look at the pattern. You avoid a difficult task, you feel relief, but the task remains. You choose distraction, you feel good, but you lose time. You react emotionally, you feel released, but you create consequences. In each case, the immediate reward hides the long-term cost. And because the cost is delayed, it is easy to ignore. But it accumulates. And over time, it becomes significant. Short-term comfort, long-term cost. To break this pattern, you must train yourself to delay gratification. This means you do not act on every urge. You do not satisfy every desire immediately. You create space. You wait. Because when you delay, something important happens. The intensity of the urge decreases. The emotional pull weakens. And your ability to think clearly increases. This gives you control. Another important aspect is redefining reward. Most people associate reward with immediate pleasure. But real reward is progress. Completing a task. Maintaining consistency. Making a better decision. These are not always immediately satisfying. But they create long-term value. So you shift your focus. You stop chasing comfort. You start valuing progress. Short-term comfort, long-term cost. This requires a change in mindset. You must accept that discomfort is part of growth. It is not something to avoid. It is something to work through. When you feel resistance, that is the moment to act. Not to avoid. Because resistance often points to what matters. And acting through it builds strength. Another key factor is awareness of trade-offs. Every decision is an exchange. When you choose comfort, you give up progress. When you choose discipline, you accept discomfort. There is no neutral option. So you must be conscious of what you are trading. Ask yourself, what am I gaining now and what am I losing later? This question creates clarity, because it forces you to see the full picture, not just the immediate benefit. Short-term comfort, long-term cost. There is also a compounding effect. Small choices, repeated daily, create significant outcomes. If you consistently choose immediate gratification, the cost compounds. If you consistently delay it, the benefits compound. This is how long-term success is built. Not through one decision, but through repeated choices. Another important point is that delaying gratification builds mental strength. Each time you resist an urge, you strengthen your control. You prove to yourself that you are not controlled by impulses. You build discipline. And discipline creates consistency. Consistency creates results. Short-term comfort, long-term cost. This also improves your focus. When you are not constantly seeking immediate reward, your attention stabilizes. You can work longer, think clearer, act more deliberately, because your mind is not jumping from one stimulus to another. It is directed. Another benefit is reduced regret. Most regret comes from choosing short-term comfort, avoiding responsibility, reacting emotionally, delaying action. When you detach from immediate gratification, you avoid these patterns, because you think before acting. You evaluate consequences, and that leads to better decisions. Short-term comfort, long-term cost. To apply this, you must practice in small situations. When you feel the urge to check your phone, wait. When you feel like avoiding a task, start it. When you want immediate relief, pause. These small delays build your control, because they train your mind to tolerate discomfort. And tolerance is key, because if you cannot tolerate discomfort, you will always choose comfort. Another useful technique is setting clear priorities. When you know what matters, it is easier to delay gratification, because you have a reference point. You know what you are working toward, and that makes short-term comfort less appealing, because it does not align with your goal. Short-term comfort, long-term cost. Over time, this becomes a habit. You stop reacting to every urge. You start evaluating. You choose based on long-term outcomes, not immediate feelings. And this changes your behavior. You become more disciplined, more focused, more consistent, because your actions are aligned with your goals. Another important aspect is patience. Delaying gratification requires you to wait, to trust the process, to continue without immediate reward. This is difficult, but it is necessary, because meaningful results take time, and time requires patience. Short-term comfort, long-term cost. As you continue, your identity shifts. You are no longer someone who seeks comfort. You are someone who prioritizes progress, someone who can delay, someone who can endure. And that identity strengthens your discipline, because your actions align with who you are. This is how you take control of your future, not by eliminating desire, but by controlling your response to it. You feel the urge, you recognize it, but you do not act immediately. You wait, you think, you choose. Because your future is built on what you do consistently. And what you do consistently must not be driven by immediate gratification. It must be driven by long-term thinking. So remember the principle. Apply it in every situation. Train yourself to delay, to evaluate, to choose deliberately. Because what feels good now is not always what is right. And what is right often requires patience. Short-term comfort, long-term cost. Chapter 8. Build emotional awareness without reactivity. Most people are not aware of their emotions until after they have acted on them. They react first, then reflect later. They speak, decide, or respond, and only afterward realize they were driven by emotion. By that point, the action is already done. The consequence is already set. This is the problem. Because without awareness, there is no control. Observe, don't react. This is the principle you must develop. Not to suppress your emotions, but to notice them without immediately acting on them. Because emotions are not the enemy. Uncontrolled reactions are. You are supposed to feel. But you are not supposed to be controlled by what you feel. Observe, don't react. Emotional awareness means recognizing what is happening inside you in real time. Not after the fact. In the moment. When you feel irritation, you notice it. When you feel anxiety, you identify it. When you feel frustration, you acknowledge it. You do not ignore it. But you also do not act on it immediately. This creates separation. Because now you are not the emotion. You are observing it. And that distinction is critical. Observe, don't react. Most people merge with their emotions. They say, I am angry. But a more accurate statement is, I feel anger. This small change creates distance. When you say, I am angry, the emotion becomes your identity. When you say, I feel anger, the emotion becomes something you are experiencing, not something you are. And that gives you control. Because you can observe something without being controlled by it. Observe, don't react. The next step is staying present with the emotion. This is where most people struggle. Because emotions create discomfort. And the instinct is to remove that discomfort immediately. By reacting. By distracting. By avoiding. But when you react, you do not process the emotion. You release it. And that release often leads to poor decisions. So instead of reacting, you stay with it. You let the feeling exist, without acting on it. This requires discipline, because it feels unnatural. But it is effective, Because emotions, like impulses, are temporary. They rise, they peak, they pass. If you do not act, they lose intensity. Observe, don't react. Another important aspect is understanding that emotions carry information. They are signals. They tell you something about your perception, your state, or your environment. But they are not instructions. They do not tell you what to do. They tell you what you are experiencing. So your role is to interpret the signal, not follow it blindly. For example, feeling anxious does not mean something is wrong. It may mean you are uncertain. It may mean you are under pressure. It may mean you are tired. The emotion points to something, but you must analyze it. Observe, don't react. This is where awareness becomes powerful. Because once you notice the emotion, you can question it. Why am I feeling this? What triggered it? Is this reaction proportional to the situation? These questions create clarity. They move you from reaction to understanding. And understanding improves your response. Another key benefit is emotional stability. When you observe instead of react, your emotions become less intense. Because you are not amplifying them. You are not adding thoughts, assumptions, or actions that increase their impact. You are simply noticing. And that reduces their influence. Over time, this creates calmness. Not because you feel less, but because you control more. Observe, don't react. There is also a physical component. When emotions rise, your body responds. Your heart rate increases. Your breathing changes. Your muscles tense. These physical changes reinforce the emotion. So when you observe, you must also regulate your body. Slow your breathing. Relax your posture. Reduce tension. This helps your body return to a neutral state. And when your body is calm, your mind follows. This strengthens your awareness. Another important point is that awareness requires attention. If your mind is constantly distracted, you will not notice your emotions in time. You will react automatically. So you must train your attention. Practice being present. Notice your thoughts. Notice your feelings. Notice your reactions. This builds your awareness. And awareness creates control. Observe, don't react. To develop this skill, you must practice in everyday situations. When you feel irritated, notice it. Do not respond immediately. When you feel stressed, acknowledge it. Do not act impulsively. When you feel the urge to react, pause. Observe. Let the emotion pass. Then decide. These small moments build your ability, because they train your mind to separate feeling from action. Another key aspect is consistency. You cannot apply this occasionally. It must become a habit. You must observe your emotions regularly, in different situations, under different conditions, until it becomes automatic, because only then will it work under pressure. Observe, don't react. Over time, this changes how you experience emotions. They no longer control you. They no longer dictate your actions. They become information, something you notice, something you understand, but not something you follow blindly. This creates freedom, because you are no longer reacting automatically. You are choosing. Another benefit is improved decision-making. When you are aware of your emotions, you can separate them from your choices. You can ask, am I deciding based on logic or feeling? This question improves your judgment, because it forces you to evaluate your state, and that leads to better outcomes. Observe, don't react. As you continue, your identity begins to shift. You become someone who is aware, someone who is controlled, someone who does not react impulsively. This identity strengthens your behavior, because your actions align with your self-image. You do not need to remind yourself. You naturally observe. You naturally pause. You naturally choose. And this creates consistency, because your behavior is no longer random. It is intentional. Observe, don't react. This is how you take control of your emotions, not by eliminating them, but by understanding them, not by suppressing them, but by observing them, because awareness is the foundation of control, and control is what shapes your decisions. So train yourself. Notice your emotions. Stay present with them. Do not act immediately. Let them pass. Then choose your response, because your future is not determined by what you feel. It is determined by what you do, and what you do must not be controlled by reaction. It must be guided by awareness. So remember the principle. Observe, don't react. Chapter 9. Strengthen decision-making under pressure. Pressure changes how you think. It speeds up your mind, narrows your focus, and amplifies your emotions. In calm situations, you can analyze, reflect, and choose carefully. But under pressure, your thinking becomes reactive. You feel urgency. You feel the need to decide quickly. And that urgency often leads to poor decisions. Clarity over chaos. This is the principle you must rely on when pressure rises. Because pressure does not remove your ability to think. It distorts it. Your goal is not to eliminate pressure. Your goal is to think clearly despite it. Most people fail here because they try to match the speed of the situation. They rush their decisions. They react to urgency instead of managing it. But speed without clarity is dangerous. It leads to mistakes. So instead of rushing, you simplify. Clarity over chaos. Under pressure, complexity is your enemy. The more you try to process at once, the more confused you become. Your mind cannot handle multiple variables efficiently in a stressed state. So you reduce the situation. You break it down. You focus on what matters most. This is how you regain control. Instead of asking, "What do I do about everything?" you ask, "What is the next best action?" This simplifies your thinking. Because you are not trying to solve everything at once. You are solving one step. Clarity over chaos. Another key aspect is controlling your state. Before you make any decision, you must stabilize yourself. Because your state influences your thinking. If you are tense, your decisions will be rushed. If you are overwhelmed, your decisions will be unclear. So you start with control. Pause. Breathe. Slow down your internal pace. This does not mean you delay unnecessarily. It means you create enough stability to think clearly. Even a few seconds can make a difference, because it reduces emotional intensity. And when emotion decreases, clarity increases. Clarity over chaos. Once your state is stable, you apply a simple decision framework. Do not overcomplicate it. Ask 3 questions. What is happening? What are my options? What is the best immediate action? This structure keeps your thinking organized. It prevents your mind from drifting. It focuses your attention. And that improves your decision. Because structure replaces chaos. Another important point is that under pressure, you will never have complete information. Waiting for certainty is not an option. You must decide with what you have. This requires confidence. Not blind confidence, but functional confidence. The belief that you can act, observe, and adjust. Because most decisions are not final. They can be refined. They can be corrected. So your goal is not perfection. It is direction. Clarity over chaos. This mindset reduces hesitation. Because you are not trying to get everything right immediately. You are making the best decision available. Then adapting as needed. This creates momentum. And momentum is critical under pressure. Because it keeps you moving forward. Another key factor is prioritization. Not everything is equally important. Under pressure, your mind treats everything as urgent. But that is not accurate. You must identify what matters most. What has the highest impact? What requires immediate attention? Focus on that. Ignore the rest. At least for now. This reduces overload. And overload is what creates confusion. Clarity over chaos. There is also an emotional component. Pressure amplifies fear, doubt, and urgency. These emotions push you toward quick, reactive decisions. But you must separate emotion from action. You acknowledge the feeling, but you do not let it decide. You return to your framework. You focus on facts. You evaluate options. You choose deliberately. This is control. Another important aspect is experience. The more you expose yourself to pressure, the better you become at handling it. Because familiarity reduces intensity. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable. So you must practice. In small situations. Make decisions under mild pressure. Train your thinking. Build your confidence. Because when real pressure arrives, you will rely on your training. Clarity over chaos. Another key benefit of structured decision-making is reduced regret. When you follow a process, you know that your decision was based on logic, not impulse. Even if the outcome is not perfect, you trust your approach. And that trust is important, because it builds confidence. You know you can handle pressure. You know you can think clearly. And that certainty improves your performance. Clarity over chaos. To strengthen this skill, you must review your decisions. After a situation, reflect. What did you do well? What could be improved? This is not for criticism. It is for learning. Because each experience improves your framework. And over time, your decisions become faster and more accurate. Another important point is that clarity is not about knowing everything. It is about knowing enough to act. You do not need complete certainty. You need sufficient understanding. And that comes from focusing on what matters. Not everything. Clarity over chaos. As you continue to apply this principle, your behavior changes. You stop reacting to pressure. You start managing it. You become more composed, more focused, more effective, because your thinking is structured, not scattered, and that creates better outcomes. Another benefit is that others begin to rely on you. In high-pressure situations, people look for stability. They look for someone who can think clearly. When you demonstrate that ability, you become a point of reference, someone others trust, because you do not add to the chaos. You reduce it. Clarity over chaos. Over time, this becomes part of your identity. You are someone who stays clear under pressure, someone who simplifies, someone who decides effectively. And that identity strengthens your discipline, because your actions align with your thinking. You do not need to force it. You operate that way naturally. This is how you take control in difficult situations, not by avoiding pressure, but by managing it, not by reacting, but by thinking. Because pressure is inevitable, but chaos is optional, and clarity is a choice. So when the next high-pressure moment arrives, remember this. Do not rush. Do not overthink. Do not react emotionally. Pause. Simplify. Focus. Decide. Because your ability to think clearly under pressure determines your results. And that clarity comes from structure. So apply the principle consistently. Clarity over chaos. Chapter 10. Create a logic-driven identity. Your decisions are not random. They follow patterns. And those patterns are shaped by your identity. If you see yourself as someone who reacts emotionally, you will continue to react emotionally. If you see yourself as someone who is impulsive, you will continue to act on impulse. Your behavior aligns with how you define yourself. This is why control is not just about changing actions. It is about changing identity. I choose logic over emotion. This is the foundation of a logic-driven identity. Not the absence of emotion, but the prioritization of reason over reaction. Because emotions will always exist, but they do not have to control your decisions. Most people try to control their behavior without changing their identity. They attempt to act differently in certain situations, but internally they still see themselves the same way. This creates conflict, because their actions do not match their self-image. And over time they return to old patterns. To create lasting change, you must shift how you see yourself. I choose logic over emotion. A logic-driven identity means that your default approach is to think, analyze, and decide based on reason, not impulse, not feeling, not temporary states. You still experience emotions, but you do not follow them blindly. You evaluate them. You process them. You decide based on what is true, not what feels intense. This creates stability, because your decisions are not fluctuating with your emotions. They are consistent. I choose logic over emotion. To build this identity, you must start with awareness. You must notice how often your decisions are influenced by emotion. In conversations, in reactions, in daily choices, you observe the pattern, not to judge yourself, but to understand. Because awareness is the first step to change. Once you see the pattern, you can interrupt it. I choose logic over emotion. The next step is deliberate action. You begin to make decisions based on logic even when emotion is present. You feel the urge to react, but you pause. You feel frustration, but you analyze. You feel pressure, but you think clearly. Each time you do this, you reinforce your identity. Because identity is built through repetition. Every controlled decision strengthens the belief. Every emotional reaction weakens it. So you must be consistent. I choose logic over emotion. Another important aspect is internal language. The way you speak to yourself shapes your identity. If you constantly say, "I'm just emotional," or "I can't control my reactions," you reinforce that identity. But when you change your language, you change your perception. I think before I act. I stay calm under pressure. I make decisions based on facts. These statements are not just words. They are instructions. They guide your behavior. And over time they become true. I choose logic over emotion. There is also a practical component. A logic-driven identity requires a framework. You must train yourself to analyze situations, ask questions, evaluate facts, consider consequences. This becomes your default process. Instead of reacting, you think. Instead of assuming, you verify. Instead of rushing, you evaluate. This creates clarity, and clarity leads to better decisions. I choose logic over emotion. Another key factor is consistency across situations. You do not apply logic only in important moments. You apply it everywhere. In small decisions, in daily interactions, in routine situations. Because identity is not built in isolated moments. It is built through repeated behavior. The more consistent you are, the stronger your identity becomes. I choose logic over emotion. There will be challenges, moments where emotions are strong, where reacting feels easier, where thinking feels difficult. These are critical moments, because they test your identity. If you follow emotion, you reinforce the old pattern. If you choose logic, you strengthen the new one. So you must be aware and choose deliberately. I choose logic over emotion. Another important benefit of this identity is reduced regret. When your decisions are based on logic, you are less likely to act impulsively. You consider consequences. You evaluate options. You choose deliberately. This reduces mistakes, because your actions are not driven by temporary states. They are guided by reason. Another key advantage is improved relationships. When you respond with logic instead of emotion, your communication becomes clearer. You avoid unnecessary conflict. You express yourself effectively. You listen more. You react less. This creates stability, because your interactions are not influenced by emotional fluctuations. I choose logic over emotion. Over time, this identity becomes natural. You no longer need to remind yourself. You automatically pause. You automatically analyze. You automatically choose based on reason, because it is who you are, not something you are trying to do. Another important point is that logic does not eliminate emotion. It organizes it. It places it in context. It prevents it from taking control. You still feel, but you decide. This balance is critical, because complete suppression is not sustainable, but controlled response is. I choose logic over emotion. As this identity develops, your confidence increases. You trust your decisions. You trust your process. You trust your ability to handle situations, because your behavior is consistent, and consistency builds confidence. Another key aspect is long-term impact. When your decisions are logic-driven, your outcomes improve, because your choices are aligned with reality, not perception. This creates progress, because clear thinking leads to effective action, and effective action produces results. I choose logic over emotion. To apply this, define your identity clearly. Decide who you are, not who you want to be occasionally, but who you are consistently. Then act accordingly. In every situation, in every decision, align your behavior with that identity, because identity drives action, and action shapes results. Over time, this becomes automatic. You do not react emotionally. You respond logically. You do not act impulsively. You decide deliberately. You do not let emotions control your future. You control your decisions. This is who I am. And that is the final level of control. Not managing emotions occasionally, but building an identity that prioritizes logic. Quietly. Consistently. Without exception. So commit to it, reinforce it, live it, because your future is shaped by your decisions, And your decisions must be guided by clarity, not emotion. So remember the principle. I choose logic over emotion. Your life is shaped by decisions. Not once, not occasionally, but daily. And most of those decisions are emotional. Small reactions, small impulses, small choices. But over time, they build your future. You don't need to remove emotions. You need to control them. To feel without reacting. To pause before deciding. To think before acting. Because strength is not about having no emotions. It is about not being controlled by them. And once you master that, everything changes. Your decisions become sharper. Your actions become consistent. Your future becomes intentional. You stop reacting to life. You start directing it. And now the question is not whether emotions will appear. They will. The real question is, will you follow them? Or will you lead yourself instead?